In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God.
So thus far what we've done is we've identified what we're focusing on, which is the mind, and that was lecture 1, kind of recapping how Kareem did it, and the components of the mind, and kind of the framework. What is it that we're going to be working on here, the engine, if you will? What are the parts of this engine that we're working on? And then when Abuna Joshua spoke to us, he talked to us about what does it look like when your engine or your mind isn't functioning properly? What are the causes of that? And then many of us had kind of revelations during that time. And then we had the last 3 talks, which was about, okay, how do we fix this broken engine or mind if it is broken? And newsflash, as I kind of alluded to in my first talk, all of our engines or minds are broken. We are fallen creatures. We were given the potential to strive for perfection through baptism and chrismation. But does that mean that I became perfect? No, and I tell this to converts, like when you get baptized, don't expect like light to shine from your hands and you're all of a sudden, that's not how it works. So now that we've covered those 3 things and we've received the how, now we're going to get to the where or the destination. What does it look like when this engine is functioning properly and this mind is functioning properly? So we'll start off by a verse. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come to see you or I am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. So we talked about this concept of the nous and everything, and I told you kind of when I tried to explain it, I sounded like Yoda explaining the Force to Luke, and it's this very abstract concept. But I want you to see where it leads to when, at least in terms of some fruits of what it looks like when we have this nous of Christ. First and foremost, the first fruit that we will have and see is love. And as John says in his letter, God is love. He who abides in love abides in God and God in him. Do you see that? God dwelling in us, in that temple. God abides in him. And when we say love here, we're not talking about this feeling of love. Like, for example, when I see Andrew, I get the warm fuzzies and I feel love. It's not that. Love is an action. And when we look at love, love is what held Christ to the cross. It is a painful action. And this is the type of love that we need to think about when we're in our lives. So your relationships with your coworkers, for example, all of us have coworkers that drive us insane, whether it be bosses or coworkers. What is our relationship as Christians? By this they will know that you are my disciples, that you what? Love one another. I am sure all of your supervisors and bosses and coworkers know that you're Coptic Christian. At least they should. Then how do they see that? It was really bothersome when I used to serve with the college youth that I would tell someone, I'm Coptic Christian. And they would say, not the youth, but this would be like someone outside. Oh, Coptic. Aren't those the people that cheat on exams? And you see that? Yeah, you experience that too? How does that look to people? When we say we're something, but we're not. How are we ambassadors for Christ? But as love here with your coworkers, with your spouses, with your wives, your children, your fellow servants that you serve with, is that love there or not? The next thing is service. We've heard service so many times during this talk, and it is of the utmost importance. The way we've spoken about it thus far is that to help us form the mind of Christ and to help with the healing, go serve. Because making other people happy, and there are many studies that have been done about this, making other people happy is probably the best way of making yourself happy. It's actually, they'll say happiness isn't personal. We don't call it personal happiness. Happiness is actually relational. By having a relationship with people and serving them, you then can become happy. The poet John Milton, he said that a self-referential life is a life lived at the doorsteps of hell. Self-referential means I'm focused on myself all the time. And when you do that, you're essentially living in hell because you're focused only on yourself. And everything is about you. And any small thing that comes up, it's like the end of the world. Like, how can this small issue be whatever? But then when you go and you experience serving somebody else and giving to them, then you start to experience that healing. But in this type here, when you have the Christ-centered nous, this service starts to go above and beyond to the type of service that Christ did. We have here in Galatians, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty, freedom, liberty. What do I do with this liberty? Only do not use this liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. So you have love, and then you have this service. When you've been given this liberty, this nous, and this mind of Christ, what do I do with it? I now submit it, and I serve one another. The next one is mission. You'd be like, what's the difference between service and mission? Service is typically a singular thing in a vacuum. For example, I serve as a deacon in my church. I serve Sunday school. I serve as a husband. I serve as a father. But what about mission? Mission takes it to a broader and wider 30,000-foot view of what I'm doing. For example, I serve as a deacon in an American Coptic church that welcomes converts. So I'm not just here to serve as a deacon and to sing hymns, but my mission is to lead the congregation in prayer and worship in a way that when a congregant walks in, like a potential new person to Orthodoxy, walks into this church, they experience the worship the way it is intended to be. So the person who goes up to sing a hymn, if they don't know it well, don't sing it. Not because I went and practiced it and, Yallah Habibi, let him sing. No, because this hymn might be the only hymn someone experiences. So within the context of the broader mission, I start to act in certain ways because it's not about me. It is about him. It is about Christ. You know who had this nous, this mind of Christ? Who can name? Yeah, for sure, St. Paul. But there's someone that I'm thinking about who is like, it's not about me. He needs to increase. St. John, very good. He must increase and I must decrease. It's not about me. And here, with Isaiah, when he said, the voice of the Lord, whom shall I send? Who shall go out for us? Then he said, here I am, Lord, send me. Your mission as a husband isn't to just be a husband. Your mission is to present your wife as blameless before God. Your mission as a father isn't to feed and educate your children. No, your mission is their salvation. How do I take them as children that were entrusted to me, to him? And I see everything through that lens. Okay? I hope I'm making sense with this. What does it look like when we don't have the mind of Christ? We actually have many examples, but at least the outcome of these examples. We have two famous people, at least I can throw many up here. But for example, Gandhi said, I like your Christ, but I don't like you Christians because you Christians are so unlike your Christ. This is serious. As ambassadors for Christ, how do we represent him? And the way we'll represent him is how we present ourselves. What mindset are we operating by? And then the other one is Mark Twain. I would have become a Christian, but I knew too many of them. He's like, I've seen enough of that. I don't want that. But this is why today's talk, for me at least, is very special, because we have a man who is contemporary and is now a saint by the grace of God, Bishoy Kamel. And he is known as the living gospel. Like when you talk to people, and I have been impacted by people who were his disciples. So I mean, he passed away before I ever had the chance to meet him by about a decade. But his disciples, I got a chance to disciple under them. And all of them, without exception, would describe him as the living gospel, the living word, the living logos. Like whatever's in the gospel, he preached. So what makes him special, at least for our talk, we can pull up quotes from St. Anthony, from the Desert Fathers, which is great, and we have something to benefit by them. But with Abuna Bishoy, he was so contemporary, we're just talking about 40, 50 years ago, that we actually have firsthand accounts, and we can see, remember that framework that we talked about from the logismoi to the logos to the dianoia and then into the nous? We can see actually how all that works because of how close he was to people, and they have like accounts of him speaking, and we'll kind of go through those stories. One thing that Abuna Bishoy Kamel harped on and said many times, people do not need to hear about Christ anymore. They've heard enough. Rather, they need to see Christ in us. We serve we are at home. We were talking in our group, our work group, about like our kids. And we said that, yes, we tell things to our kids, but it's not really what we say. It's what we do. What do they see in us? I remember speaking to somebody when they kind of had gone through trauma and they wanted to push away from the church. You're asking why? Like, my mom used to pray the Agbeya every day and talk about God, but she was the furthest thing from God that I've ever seen. And that was what was implanted in the mind. This is what you say is God and Christian and what you're supposed to live. I don't want that. This is what our kids see in us. So taking that they rather need to see Christ in us, how do they see Christ in us? It's when we have the nous in the mind of Christ. And as St. Francis said, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. So the only way to do this is to have Christ, becoming a living gospel by acquiring the nous of Christ. The first thing that I'll mention about Abuna Bishoy Kamel that was known and was well documented about it, and people attested to it, was that he was very intentional. And I want to talk about this for a little bit because it's come up a few times, and I want, for the risk of beating a dead horse, or if Peter was here where I can't say that, I say have to feed a fed horse just so animal cruelty. But the idea here, I want to make sure it's driven home. I mentioned yesterday that I hope what's taken from this conference is, wow, okay, something is wrong. I found something wrong. And it sets you on the path. The other thing to take is this idea of intentionality. I need to be intentional about getting better. And I really appreciate Abe just keeping it real. And as he said, 100, do not complain if you're not doing the things to get better. And I say this, I think we've been here long enough and we've shared a lot, so I'll be vulnerable with you. I myself went through 2 years of counseling and therapy because I found that I had a mistake. This was way before in the diocese. I'm not that old, but it's way before in the diocese, before we had these programs and whatever. And at least under the guidance of His Eminence and my father of confession, to how do you do this? And my first exposure to like the why, the wounded mind, was reading a book called Boundaries. And as I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is me. It was like holding a mirror. And it's almost like I had this reaction. Well, what do I do with that? So I had to become intentional about it. Tomorrow in the gospel, we will hear Christ say, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What you prioritize, what you count as your treasure, that's where your heart will be. So for example, if I said that I can guarantee you 100% that in that lake out there, or that water, there is a suitcase with $10 million. No matter what Abuna says, all of you are going to leave from here and go to it. Why? Because that's where my treasure. So that's where I am going to be. So if you prioritize your well-being and your health, that is where you will go. That is where I will find you. And the great thing is the way Christ said it was a lot of times we deceive ourselves and be like, yeah, I want to get better. Well, okay. If you want to get better, show me. Show me by your actions. Yes, Abun.
Sorry to interrupt. Is being intentional decision or a result of, is it a symptom or is it a cause?
I think it actually can be both. So the reason why ultimately it's a decision, but usually sometimes it's a decision from a cause. And I think a perfect example was one that Abe gave about the prodigal son. He came to his senses. He came to himself. Well, what made him come to himself? It was essentially a symptom or a cause from him hitting rock bottom and seeing, okay, wait a minute, I'm not where I need to be, and this is horrible. So then that led to him having a decision and saying, okay, this isn't going to work out. I have got to go. What I would implore each and every one of you in here is that don't wait till you hit rock bottom before you make the decision to get better. Unfortunately, sometimes this is how we work. We have to hit rock bottom before we do it. But what do I mean by intentional? Intentional means when Father Joshua came and gave all these things about what to do. I'm sure some of us felt, man, we've heard this since Sunday school. I paid $200 and something to come here to hear prayer, fasting, read the... When you're intentional about prayer, you're actually praying. I'll give you an example. If you went to the doctor and the doctor said, you're fat, you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, your high blood pressure is high, you're going to need a kidney transplant in 2 years if you don't fix yourself. You're going to get on it. So you go to the gym. Now, by you going to the gym, have you done anything? I walked into, actually we had a friend, I'll mention to you later. We had a friend back in college. We would go to the gym and work out. He would go to the gym and sit at the smoothie station. We both went to the gym. But did he get anything? No. And even when you go to the gym, for those of you who work out, there's this thing called the mind-muscle connection. If I'm working out my bicep, I have to focus on my bicep. And when I focus on it, I'm making that mind-muscle connection. Okay? So when you're praying, this actually goes back to the Desert Fathers. They say your mind needs to enter your heart. So this quick prayer, if I stand before prayer, I'm like, Abuna, I prayed, I read the Bible, I did the Christian checklist. No, it's not about what you did, but how you did it. When the woman came to touch the hem of the garment of Christ, and Christ said, where did this power come out of me? Who touched me? The disciples were like, what are you talking about? There's 1,000 people who touched you. Why was this woman able to draw power out of Christ? Because she was intentional about it. She had something, she realized, I am broken. I've tried everything else. I need something. And that's what drew it out. So my hope is that we become intentional about this. The other thing that I will say why intentionality is important is because I heard this also too, at least this motif kind of go around, is this idea of, okay, I'm going to walk out of here with all the fixes and I'm going to be perfect. And you're going to go home and your wife is going to look at you and you're going to make a mistake and be like, oh, what? Oh, we paid for this and you spent time away from us and here you are still the same. This is a journey. Please understand that this is a journey, which is why I mentioned to you, like I went through counseling for 2 years, but just because I did that doesn't mean I came out perfect. This thing lasts for your entire life. This is what orthodoxy is about. It's about moving from glory to glory until you reach the final destination, which is our perfection in Christ when we go with him. There was a brother who went to Abba Piman and asked him, is it possible for one to control and not surrender any of their thoughts? His response was, there exists those who can have 10 thoughts and who are presented with 10 thoughts and only surrender one. There exists those. There's this unicorn and these unicorns out there, somewhere way out there, that have 10 thoughts and surrender one. That's 1 out of 10. Out of the 70,000 that we talked about, thoughts that they get a day, 700 they surrender them. So perfection isn't the goal. We shouldn't be, like, if we fall, that's okay. That's why the verse that Abe put up there was very important from Malachi. Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. For what? When or if I fall? When I fall. Give yourself grace. Understand that you will fall. There was a question about forgiveness. Why? Like, how do I forgive myself? Forgive yourself. The one way to forgive, the foundation for forgiving yourself is to say, I will make mistakes. Okay? So with Abuna Bishoy Kamel, he was intentional about what he did. Tasoni, his wife, talks about him reading the Bible. And it was essentially like to the point where he would go, and he's a priest. He's a priest of like thousands of families. Okay, so when we talk about timing, just to show you his intentionality, he would sit down to read the Bible, and she would warm the food for him. Abuna, the food is ready. Okay, I'm coming. And he's sitting there reading the Bible. The food would get cold, so she reheats the food. Abuna, the food is ready. And then so she would go to him and be like, Abuna, when are you going to come? So that way I don't have to keep reheating the food. He's like, I'm so sorry. I got lost in it. It was his lifeblood, the gospel, reading it and digesting it and letting it become like one with his heart. And then one thing he would always say to Sony is like, after they would read, or they, sometimes read separately, is, what verse did you decide to apply today? Do you see the intentionality behind that? I read a chapter. Okay, what'd you read? I don't remember. That's not intentionality. Read. One maybe practice to do. Instead of saying, I will read one chapter, add something else to that. I will read one chapter in 15 minutes. Because then that gives you a time frame. Put your timer on and say, I'm going to read this and I'm going to wrestle with this chapter for 15 minutes or 10 minutes. Okay, do this also with your prayer. And you'll find, if you haven't done this, it's actually a scary thing. I think, was it Abuna you mentioned? No, Abe, sorry, you mentioned this. Take your prayer and put a timer for it and say, I'm going to pray for 10 minutes. And I'm going to think of nothing for this 10 minutes. Put it on in the alarm and let it count down from 10 to 1 and put it aside. Watch your reaction. You're going to sit there and you're going to be like, maybe my alarm isn't working, maybe something's on, and you're going to get lost. This shows us like the intentionality behind what we do. Abun Antonius Hanin, who also served with him for a little bit, said, I witnessed that he applied to his personal life what he was teaching others. So it was the application. I read the Bible, what am I doing? And then how do I now apply it? And it was applied, he just didn't teach it. Whatever I tell my kids, I need to be sure I do. Whatever I tell my wife, I need to be sure I do, and so on. Saint Evagrius, he says this, a mind that is continually occupied with the words of the Holy Spirit will eventually find that the thoughts of the enemy find no place or to rest in it. And we've mentioned this, this concept has come up several times. But even more so, he says we must not simply recite any verse, but the one that is exactly suited to the thought that is troubling us. You see this? This is that idea of that medicine. And one thing that Evagrius was very, very keen on was this idea of backtalk. When Satan would come to you with one thing, there is a certain way you talk back to him. You just don't say anything, but you apply the specific thing to him. So I will share an example of kind of what this mind of Christ is specifically with this. One time, some people broke into Soni's apartment, and they stole some money that was on like this plate. It's usually like used for desserts or to present food on. So they took the plate and all the money that was in it. And this money was that people gave to Abuna to keep for safekeeping. I mean, we would do that in the bank these days, but back then in Egypt, they would give the money to Abuna because they trusted him. They couldn't trust anybody else. So Tasoni was very upset. When I say Tasoni, you know who I'm talking about, right? Like his wife. Yes, Tasoni Onjin, who's actually was the sister of who? Abuna Krulus, who's here from, the departed Abuna Krulus here from Florida. So, yes, but Abuna Krulus more so because he was in Florida, right? So some of us were touched by him and were served by him. But anyway, so Abuna then asks her, he says, what are your thoughts, Tasoni? Like, are you happy? Like, are you joyful that this happened? She's like, to be honest, Abuna, like, someone stole all of our money and this expensive plate that it was on. Content, fine. Happiness, that's a bridge too far. I can't deal with that. So then he asked her very smilingly, with a joy smile on his face, he said, and then how do you expect then to be able to fulfill the verse, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting? He was looking for an opportunity to apply this verse. This is the mind of Christ. How do I apply it? And he looked for it, and he's like, oh, great, wonderful. I get a chance to apply it. After some time, the plate, someone came back and brought the plate with some cookies on it. And it was the exact same plate that was stolen. And Tasoni was like, okay, we caught the guy or whoever brought it back. And she was telling Abuna, look, it's the plate. And I guess they had some way of knowing it was theirs. And it's the plate that we had, and we got it. So then Tasoni told Abuna, I'm not giving it back. And she's well within her right. It's my plate, you took it, and now it's back to me. Khalas, it's not even finders keepers, it's mine. So then Abuna, again, in his mind of Christ, said, and then how do you expect to apply the verse, if someone takes your coat, do not withhold from them your shirt also? You see that? The level that's there, and I know something probably going through many of our minds is, man, what do you like? This is way too far out there. No, it is not. It is far out there in the sense of what it means to be human. But what it means to be a child of Christ, which is the whole purpose of the Sermon on the Mountain. You have heard how it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But now I tell you, he's moving you from child of the world to child of God. And in the middle of that was that verse that we talked about, if your eye is bad, which is kind of that noose thing. Father Tedros Malati, he says this about him. The most distinct feature in the personality of Father Bishoy since his early youth is taking a conclusive decision regarding his life. I'm making a decision to be such and such. He didn't care to occupy a certain position, join a certain monastery, or be appointed a priest, but rather he took a decision to become an ambassador of Christ wherever he dwells under all circumstances. He never deviated from this decision. He offered his life as a love offering for the sake of the Church Christ. You see that? Many of you in this room are about the age that Abuna Bishoy started kind of his ministry as a priest, maybe even a little bit before that. But you see from here, he took the decision and he never deviated. That's intentionality. I'm taking the decision today or during this conference to be a man of God, to be a husband that is reflective of Christ, to be a father that is reflective of the fatherhood of God, to be a servant as an ambassador of Christ. I have a wounded mind that I know I need to fix so that way I can be a better servant for him and a vessel that he can operate through. I'm making that decision. Take that. And then when you do that, don't deviate from it. Even if you fall, rise again. Okay? All right. To give you kind of an example of how this is. He hadn't lived a life of service. I'm going to speed up a little bit just so we can get to some of the other things. But he lived a life of service in Alexandria, and I think when he was around the age of like 25, he was like not the Amin Khidma of his church, but like the Amin Khidma of Alexandria. So he was like the head Sunday school servant coordinator for all of Alexandria. So he was the coordinator of coordinators, if you will. After a while, he decided to become a monk, and his desire inside of him was monasticism. So he began to make preparations. He started to pass this service off and to pass that service off, and he started to empty the service so that way the service wouldn't be caught and left without anyone running it. So he decided to go to the monastery in the year 1958. In that same year, as he decided to go, his dad became ill. So sometimes we make decisions and we're like, look, man, the train's leaving. Sorry, Dad. Bye. No. Instead of saying, okay, this was my plan that I had in, and I mention this because as guys, sometimes, if you're anything like me, a lot of guys are, you will have this plan, and the plan has to follow exactly. And if you deviate from this plan, then it's like as if the entire world breaks down. But for him, that wasn't the case. My dad's ill, I'm going to take care of him. So as he was, during this time, he took his Sunday school kids to the monastery, and this was November 18th, 1958. While he went to that monastery, Pope Kyrillos was there with a few people from Alexandria, and they were talking about a church. And they were saying, we have this church in Sporting, we need to ordain a priest. So then Abuna Bishoy comes walking in with his Sunday school kids, and then someone says, Abuna Kyrillos is like, that's a perfect one right there. And he's like, what? Like, it was something not expected at all. This man wanted to go to the monastery to leave people. And now they're talking about making him a priest. And he didn't be like, no, and run away. It troubled him, of course, but he did something that we too can learn from. He went and spoke to this gentleman called Yusuf Habib, who was a servant in his church. So you see this man who lived a very spiritual life. He relied on others to also help God. Even though your nous might be very enlightened, this is why we confess, because you're never going to reach perfection. And there will be times where things are cloudy. So you go to others who you trust, who are living a life with Christ, and you don't ask them for their insight and vision as well to see. So afterwards, when they talked about it, he went to the monastery for about 4 days. And what Yusuf Habib told him is like, go to the monastery and see if anything comes about. So he went to the monastery for 4 days to see if he would receive any guidance. He came back and he's like, what was the conclusion? Did anything be revealed to you? And he said, no. That's the other thing. Many times we want God to reveal something to us. There was no revelation. So he said, if you didn't receive anything, then follow obey Sayyidina, His Holiness, and go for the priesthood. And he did, and he submitted. And show you kind of the level of submission. He came back when? What day? On the 23rd. He got married when? On the 24th. He got married. They didn't have a wife. They went and found Tessoni, like they knew Tessoni. He's like, okay, what wife do we find? It was just like you were going to Walmart and like, okay, what aisle do I find a wife? And they got her, and he knew Tessoni in jail for a while, and they knew it was a good family. and they didn't have a chance to get a ring. But immediately, they got married, and then he went off. That was the beginning of his life, but it kind of shows you how someone who's living as submitting themselves to Christ, not my will, but your will, kind of what that looks like overall. And I just put a couple things in here. How is it that we experience these things when things are unexpected in our lives, and how do we navigate through that? So I have this other verse here that we'll get into in terms of like the new, how do we see things through the lens of Christ? A wonderful verse here again on the Sermon on the Mountain. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of God. Yes, children of the Most High. Sorry, the highlighting took over. This is, again, a lens that we need to have whenever we operate. And I know this is very theoretical, and it just seems like, okay, we hear this all the time. But let it please penetrate through you in the sense of, okay, where am I on this? Let it be a gauge in the sense of how much of the nous of Christ do I have? Again, not necessarily with your enemies. I pray to God that no one has any enemies. But between people who do persecute you, your parents, your wife, your children, those who do offer those things, how do I offer it through them? So we have a couple stories here with Abu Bishoy. These are famous stories. Many of you probably heard them before. But one of them was Abu Bishoy, as he would walk home, he would pass by this apartment complex where this boy would take orange peels and throw it at him. He was a Muslim boy, and he would throw it at him and curse him and say things. He's a boy. And I don't know, maybe here in the West, someone throwing orange peels at me, you're just like, whatever. But in the East, it's very disrespectful, especially a boy to a man doing that. And he would do this day after day. One day, as Abu Bishoy is walking by that same apartment complex, the boy goes missing. Right? The boy's not there. If it were me, I'd be like, good riddance. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But with Abu Bishoy, he went up and he knocked. And he said, where's so-and-so? And his mom said, he's sick. It's like, okay, wait for me. I'll be back later today after I finish some errands. So he comes back to the boy, not with like a flip-flop so he can spank him, or with words of saying, you see what God did to you, you sinful person, you cursed a priest. What did he bring him? A bag of oranges. The same thing that he was using against him. He brought him a bag of oranges. It's almost as if to say, no, please keep going. How else am I going to receive these gifts? And he dealt with him with love. Same kind of story happened with a shopkeeper. He was a Muslim fanatic. And instead of throwing oranges, he would hurl extreme insults at him. And then one time he had a very severe heart attack to where he was almost incapacitated for a few weeks. So Abu Bishoy would pass by, and it's almost like Abu Bishoy would purposely pass by through these things so that way he could receive these cursings. So he asked about him and found out that he was sick. Also came back, and he went to, he knocked on the door. And as soon as he knocked on the door, the son was like, Dad, that priest that you cursed is here. Of course, it probably gave the dad another heart attack, because I'd be like, oh man, he's come to kick me when I'm down. But no, instead what he did, he came and he also brought him a bag of fruit and told him, I wish you well and I hope you get better. That had such an impact on that shopkeeper to where that shopkeeper converted and became Christian. You see, when we operate through the mind of Christ, they see Christ and they will see it. And I'm sitting here up here, not saying that I know how to do this and I've mastered. I am nowhere near it, but at least we have an example by which we can look at and be like, okay, am I doing those things? And we know at least someone contemporarily did that in our day and age. In terms of his love for other people, Father Tedros says the following. One of the things that Father Bishoy did not like is this honor of clergy. He considered that the honor of the priest is being willing to wash the feet of sinners with great love. He felt that he was not worthy of serving the Lord Jesus and his children. It said when he came here to the United States, he began serving in Los Angeles. So as he was leaving the service, he asked them for a $100 a month increase in his salary. I thank God here in the diocese for the priests, like they don't have to ask the board for salary, but then they did. You can imagine the type of talk that then started. Oh, this priest, He's now making himself king over us. Now he wants more money. This month it's going to be 100. Next month, you know how the Egyptians work, right? Like, is like kind of how the mindset works. But one person who was on the board was like, this doesn't make sense. Because before Abuna came, they asked Abuna, how much money do you want? And he asked them, what is the lowest salary in your country? They said $300. I said, okay, give me $200 a month. So it didn't make sense. The guy asked for $200 and he lived on that for his entire his ministry with us. Now as he's leaving, he's asking for a raise. Why does it make sense? So he went and asked him privately. He was like, why'd you do that? It doesn't make sense. So Abuna looked at him and he said that, I'll read you the quote. My son, my service is complete here and I'm going back to Egypt. And of course, a new priest will come to serve you instead of me. However, it would be very difficult for the new priest to survive on the salary being paid, particularly as he would have a family. He would face the embarrassment of having to go to the committee from the beginning to ask for an increase. And this would cause him to be ridiculed and criticized and misunderstood, as you see. It will lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and will be damaging to him. It'd be such a bad start to his service, and this must not be permitted to happen. Rather than allow him to face such ridicule and criticism, I decided to ask for the increase. At least if the people misunderstand me, I'm going back to Egypt and this will not affect me. But if he were to ask for the increase, it would affect him in the beginning of his service and for a long time thereafter. His mind was about others. He did not come to be served, but he came to serve. And this is, again, that type of mindset. I know I'm talking about a priest with a salary, but take this and put it upon what you currently do, you and your co-workers, you and your servants. Let's be honest, sometimes when we serve, we'll try to nudge and poke another servant, make ourselves better. You with your spouse. Do I put them ahead of me to the point where I'm willing to be brought down below or not? Such an amazing way of thinking through it. And he didn't care what people thought about him. He wanted to make sure that his brother was set up in the future. Kind of a quick story about a boy with sandals. A boy who was in Egypt, they would deliver milk. Here we go to Costco or wherever to get milk, but in Egypt they would deliver it. So this boy came and delivered milk to Abuna and Tusoni's apartment. So he asked Tusoni, can you give me money for sandals? And she's like, no. Go to your mosque and ask them. Oh, they're rich and we're poor. What are you asking me? Go ask your own people. Let them take care of it. So Abuna, as he left, he's like, who was it? She said it was the boy who delivers milk. And he said, oh, did he want anything? She said, yeah, he asked me for sandals. Can you believe that? And he's like, well, what did you do? He said, I told him to go to the mosque and get sandals. He was upset. And he said, you go chase him right now. And you go, not only give him money for sandals, but you go to the store with him and buy him sandals yourself. He was a Muslim boy, not one of our children, if you want to call it that. But he viewed everybody in the sense of they were children of God. That's the view of having when you look at people through the mind of Christ. One Muslim who testified at his funeral said, I can tell you that if you asked him to undo your shoelaces, he would not only have accepted, but he would have done it with gladness and cheerfulness. His enemies were testifying on his behalf. Like people who would typically hate the Copts say, no, he didn't care who you were. I'll bring this here. Do we know who this is? For the young people, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was in a documentary about AI. I recommend you all watch it because it tells you kind of what happened. But he said something like in the terms of this idea of the nous. And if we take it at least from the physical standpoint, a lot of times when we're going through things or through trauma or something like that, we're like, why? And this is horrible, and I don't want to go through this. I just want a quick fix. But look at the mindset of this guy. I wish it was my picture. But this guy who's like huge. Well, how did he get that way? Listen to his mindset. Pain makes me grow. Growing is what I want. Therefore, for me, pain is pleasure. So when we talk about, like, I can't believe you want me to exercise or pray or do it, that's painful. But why? Do you have the why behind what you're doing? If you have the intent and the goal behind what you're doing, you will run that race, as St. Paul says. So for Arnold, It was like, of course, I want to get bigger, but my only way to get bigger is through this pain. So therefore, when I feel this pain, I know I'm growing, and therefore this pain is pleasure. Abu Bishoy experienced this as well in his mindset, but more from a kind of a spiritual standpoint. I mean, he didn't go to the gym or anything. But many times he would come back home with spit all over his galabeya, his tunic. Of course, Tasoni, his wife, when she saw that, she was like, she was so upset. Like, how can you do that? When someone sneezes on me accidentally, I want to knock him into, next Sunday. Like, what are you doing? But this is my initial reaction, right? But these people are purposely spitting. And when someone spits on you and they want to do it on purpose, it's like they bring everything that's there in COVID from 2020, they bring it out and they put it on you. Instead of him being upset, like he would look at her in bewilderment and be like, upset? How upset? He's like, these are the treasures of Christ. These are the pearls. Goeh is what he would call it. Like these are pearls of Christ. This wasn't a man just making things up or saying things like theoretical. This is what he thought. This was his mindset. The same things like even within the service itself. These are Muslims and whatever, fine, we'll give them, these are who we expect them to be in Egypt and you're going to be persecuted. Many times he had problems with the board and he would have a decision that he would want to make and the board would be vehemently against him and ridicule him and be like, I think they wanted to buy some land, like a building that was next to them, which at the time was like 5,000 guinea. And he wanted to buy it and the board was like, no, no, no. And instead of him like being like, who are you? I'm the priest, I'm gonna make the decision. He would walk back home reciting Psalm 118, it is good that I have been afflicted. Even though he was right. That piece of land, by the way, ended up being like over 1 million Egyptian pounds later on. But thankfully they were able to acquire it. But just to show you, even though he was right, and he knew he was right, he didn't continuously push. How many times in our arguments at home, we know that I'm right, or that you're right, that you're correct. And you may very well be correct, but I continuously push my idea and thought to go, and might equals right. But Abu Bishoy didn't do that. He said, okay, it is good for me that I've been afflicted. And he let it go. But, they finally got it. One time also in service, they were sitting like in a servants meeting, and I think afterwards something got very heated. And Tasoni and Jill was there, and like she said, it got so heated that I couldn't bear myself, so I had to walk away. And at the end, when everybody left, I asked Abuna, like, how did you deal with this? Like, how did you not say anything or chastise? You're the priest of the church. How could you deal with this? Like, this is not like contemporaries in the service. This is a subordinate yelling at the priest. And he said this is a sign that our service is succeeding. When Satan fights this way, notice how he didn't see it as if it was the servant that was yelling at him. He saw as if it was Satan who was fighting against him. So he just let it go. And he understood how this was. This all is because of why? Because the mind of Christ. I lived with the mind of Christ. I will tell you, everyone, when we talk about this issue with trauma, and we've dealt with trauma, and one of the steps that you will go through if trauma is your thing, is you will start blaming your parents, your teacher, whoever it is that traumatized you. And this is what I meant yesterday by don't live in this cycle of victimhood. Because you can easily sit there and just say anything, like you become anxious, oh, it's because this is my parents. Or you have a depression, well, it's because of their fault. No. As just like what Abu Bishoy here did, and what Arnold Schwarzenegger talked about pain making me grow. These are things that can help you, if you use them in the right way, to make you grow into something much more glorious. But you have to use it that way. The wind may blow wherever it may go. You can't direct the winds, but you can direct your what? It's a, I think, African proverb. Your sails, okay? This is why a lot of times we'll see the same action, people responding in different ways. The same thing. Some guy might come in here and curse all of us. Some of us might say, forgive him. Some of us might get up and punch him. Some of us might be like, whatever. It's the same action, but all of us deal with it in a certain way. But having this mind of Christ allows us to push through whatever trauma we might have, whatever difficulties we might have, and see these as opportunities for growth. This isn't loss. We haven't lost anything. If anything, we have a chance to gain. Abu Bishoy would say this, just to show you his mindset, his logos, his programming for how he sees people. He would pray, they are your children. I think this was a secret prayer that someone overheard him saying. They are your children. I am the servant of your children. I am your servant and have no right to insult or despise any of them. Because if I do, I would be insulting you or despising you. I can only serve them, love them, and reassure them of your promise that you love them all. And this type of, I have this prayer plastered because I not only see this for service, but I see this for children. I see this for spouses. This is how we see people. And you see people like this when you acquire the mind of Christ. But when someone curses you, it is within your right as a human person to curse them back. But that's not how Abu Bishoy sees it. These are all God's children, all of us. Everyone that I work with or everyone that I encounter, these are, no matter who they are, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, black, white, green, it doesn't matter. And this is how he sees them. The last thing that we'll cover with Abu Bishoy is this idea of the cross. And we could have easily named this the cross bearer because that's what he was. And he lived by the verse, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but Christ who lives in me. And he would constantly say, the cross is a school. He who escapes from it loses his future. And this is what I mean by embrace. I hate to say embrace the trauma. Like, I don't want anyone to go out there and purposely traumatize themselves. But whatever might have happened that caused your wounded mind, embrace it. Embrace it. Don't be masochistic. I don't need you to be sadistic or anything like that. But look at this and be like, God is putting me through this. One thing that we talked about in our work group, we all, at least when you go to the eye doctor, we want what vision? They want us to tell you have what type of vision? 20/20. Spiritually speaking, though, I encourage us, at least through what we see here with Abu Bishoy, to have 50/20 vision. What is 50/20 vision? If you go back to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph is talking to his brothers after everything is said and done. The man was traumatized. He lived through that trauma, as we saw yesterday. But then he had the enlightenment to tell them what? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. See that? I can assure you that your parents, if you did go through parental trauma, they didn't mean to do it in evil. It's just they did the best with what they had, and unfortunately, this is what ended up happening. But God meant it for good. And what do I mean by that? I'll specifically speak about father trauma or parental trauma. Imagine the blessing that you have of breaking the generational cycle and curse of your family. I can almost promise you that if your father and mother dealt with you in a certain way, it's because their father and mother, and then their father and mother, and then their father and mother. You have the opportunity to be the one to say, this stops now. This will not happen with my children. I've been given this blessing. You're here. You're here. God has given you an opportunity to be here at this conference to understand how to conduct your thoughts. You can now pass this on and start a new generational blessing for your children. If not your children, for your church. We talked about earlier on that even as strong men, what could this mean for the church itself and to solidify and strengthen the church? Everyone in this room has that opportunity to do that. So kind of the last thing with Abu Bishoy Kamel is this idea of the cross bearer. Of course, towards the end of his life, as many of you all know, he passed away from cancer. And his cancer kind of just happened out of nowhere. And it was serious cancer. It got to the point it affected his spine and brain. And he got to the point where he began to lose function of his right hand and just overall, just very, very painful. And at times of pain, he would look at the cross and start screaming and saying, Father. One guy was with him, I think visiting him either in the hospital or whatever, and he said, Abuna, just ask for some pain medication. Why are you going through this pain? And he looked at him and said, do not get between me and my Father. He saw the suffering and he took the suffering that he was going through as a way to participate in the suffering of Christ. And just as Christ was on the cross and said, Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? He took it as an opportunity. Now, I'm not saying if you ever, God forbid, are going through something like that, don't get some pain medication. But if you are going through pain, it's a way to participate with Christ, whether it be pain as a physical here or mental pain and anguish. Mother Teresa did this. I won't have time to go through her story, but she lived with this mental anguish for 50 years. 50. And all this stuff came out in her memoirs later on. And like the discourses, a discussion with her father of confession, she would say things like, does God even exist? Mother Teresa, who was like this paragon of service, she was dealing with fighting these thoughts. No one is going to be immune to this. Towards the end of his life, he began to take chemotherapy. And of course, as many of you know, chemotherapy does what with your hair? What starts to happen? You begin losing it. So as he was going through chemotherapy, he also went through a lot of pain, and he would say, "Oh, my Lady the Virgin, oh, my Lady the Virgin." And he was actually, I think, praying for other people. So his wife, Tasoni, started saying, "Abuna, yani, you pray for other people. Well, please pray for yourself. Pray for yourself. You've prayed so much for other people and they were healed at your hand. Pray for yourself." He looked at her. Taban, he was in this state of like chemo and pain and whatever. He looked at her almost in anger, not real anger, but just like disturbed. He said, "Me? Pray for myself? How come? I am at his service." So then his wife, of course, was like, she was distraught. Like she's seen her pain, I hate to make this analogy, but like my dog went through cancer and it was very painful to watch my dog go through cancer and die. Imagine a wife seeing her husband, that feeling that she would have, and she knows her husband essentially could ask God for healing and probably get it. And he's saying no. And she wants this pain to end. So of course she's like probably, her facial expression was just, she was distraught. After seeing her, he came back just to show you, although he's in pain, it reminds me of Christ when he was on his way to the cross. Watch The Passion, many of you, I think all of you have, and the craziness and hisa that was going on. And then there was this group of women crying. Christ is like, the cross, how difficult that was. Like, why would you be thinking about anybody else? And Christ turns around and he says, "Do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves." He's focused on others. So Abu Bishoy kind of did the same thing in the middle of his pain. And he looks at her, and as the hair is coming out, like she's brushing his hair and the hair is coming out, he takes his beard and he pulls it out, and all this hair comes out, because that's what happens with chemo. And he says this, "Look at the luxury I live in. I am engraved on the palm of his hand. This hair has the permission to leave my head. This hair has the permission to leave my head." Because we have the verse that says what? The hairs of your hair are numbered and do not fall without the permission of their father. So as he was doing that, he said, "Look at the luxury that I live in. I am engraved on the palm of his hand. He has me right in his sight." That type of way of thinking, living in that. You want to talk about mental health, talk about someone who's like, how do you get over depression? This man wasn't living as a king. He was living a rough, tough life. Probably tougher than any of us experience. At least we live in the United States. We live in good, decent luxury. He didn't have that. But why was he able to do it? Because again, he lived a life of the mind of Christ. He was conducted by God. And this is my hope, that as we go through this, we see, okay, we have these examples that we can aspire to be, and be like, okay, maybe I study more about Abu Bishoy Kamel and be like, okay, if he were in this situation, how would he deal with this? How would he react to it? Believe me, the saints, sometimes we think God will judge us on a curve. Like when I go up to heaven, it'll be like, "Hey man, I was better than everybody else." You'll be like, "Well, I have other people like Abu Bishoy, and like these are people who truly took their spiritual life, and they were no better than you or I." It's one thing I was telling Kareem when we were on our way up here. One of the things that bothers me about the saint stories, or the saint movies that we have in our church, as if these people came out of the womb of their mother with light from their hands, no struggle at all. Like they were perfect. No, it's not. They were strugglers just like we were, but they took their struggle intentionally. And they immersed themselves in the things that Abuna Joshua talked about and that Abe touched on as well. And they did it with seriousness. And this is the fruit. I didn't bring you St. Anthony. I didn't bring you St. whoever from a book from way back. I brought you a living man that people that I know have touched and have seen. And from his fruit they experienced. And then I also got to eat from their fruit. And many of you also, maybe unknowingly, have experienced that fruit as well. So I hope that we can take these examples and aspire to be them and put them as like our Michael Jordans, and the GOAT, not LeBron, but Michael Jordan, as like, this is what I want to be. This is what I'm striving to be. And if I fall, that's okay. I'm going to get back up and I'm going to continue this striving.